rolling. Hello, welcome to the JB podcast, episode 30.
Welcome, guys. We got Luke Tulloch here today. I'd say an old mate of mine, but an associate of ours.
I don't really know him.
I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to let you introduce. He's come to our Christmas parties.
Yeah. I show up to the parties and that's about it.
Yeah. You're the big dude at the parties. But Luke, well, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute, but I guess it's the focus of today is going to be around nutrition and how we can be better at it and how everyday people can improve their nutrition.
Yep.
And then if time permits, we're also going to go into a bit of muscle building talk because they're kind of intimately linked. But I'm here, Paulie's here, and we've got T-Bone.
Hello.
Just a quick intro on JB's. If you want to get at us, we're down at 15 Underwood Avenue, Botany, and you can get us online at junglebrothers.com. We're doing a bunch of great stuff there. Check us out on Instagram and all that. And if you like the episode, tell a friend about it, share it so that we can continue to provide the goodness for you guys. Lukey, man, do you want to start with a bit of an intro on yourself?
Sure. Basically, I'm a PT. I got a background in neuroscience. I've been training people for about 12 years, I think, in Sydney. And I've kind of moved into the education game a little bit for other trainers, doing seminars, that kind of stuff, which I'm very lucky that people actually want to listen to what I got to say, which is still a bit of a high for me when people invite me to do a seminar or something. I'm buzzing because it's pretty wild if people actually want to listen to you and ask you questions and stuff. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
So you're a humble dude. I guess it would be
I try to be.
Yeah.
I try to be, yeah.
Tell me, what is when you say a background in neuroscience, you studied neuroscience?
Yeah, so when I went to uni, I started off with a double degree in psychology and chemistry, or biochem. And basically just consolidated that and moved into neuroscience, just transferred into that after a couple of years. Just sort of streamlined the process a little bit. I was working as a PT at the same time as studying, so it was like carrying on a little bit. And the neuroscience degree was actually pretty flexible in what subjects I could choose, which is why I did that. So, yeah.
And what is neuroscience?
There's a lot of ways you can actually go about studying neuroscience. Like there's different branches of it. So you might think of neuroscience as like the sensory neuroscience, where we learn about how our senses work, so vision and taste and smell and all that sort of stuff. There's stuff to do with behavioral neuroscience, and so what's the brain chemistry and the behaviors going on, what drives that from the brain's level. You can look at things like anatomy, so the anatomy of the brain and the spinal cord and all the nerves is actually really complex, and I couldn't stand that stuff because it's a lot of rote learning.
Right.
So there's a lot of little branches you can actually take it in. So mine was pretty general, to be perfectly honest, and all the stuff that I focused on was more physiology-based, which is, I guess, how the different tissues in your body work. So that's kind of my angle and what the background that I took into trying to apply to training and nutrition and lifestyle.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's important to point out too, because, for people listening, they hear the neuroscience piece and they're going to think, this guy looks like an academic.
Yeah.
But if anyone's checked your Instagram, you're pretty jacked full of muscle. So you have an interest in bodybuilding or in a hypertrophy style approach to training?
Yeah, that's kind of what I like to do. I think any form of physical training is cool to me. Like I tried gymnastics for 6 months, right? Which was pretty funny. It's actually a bit of a funny story because I started and I did that and I lost about 6 or 7 kilos of muscle when I did that, right? So I went from about 97 kilos to about 90 or something like that. And there were a bunch of trainers who started at the gym at the same time as me, at the same time that I was doing this. And then after 6 months, I was like, I'm not enjoying it that much. I really miss bodybuilding. And I went back to that. And I suddenly put on that 6 or 7 kilos again really quickly. And they were all like, bro, what's going on, man? What's happening here? Yeah. Like, no, that's how I used to be. Yeah. you don't know. So, I've tried that. Like, I'd done a little bit of powerlifting and then I had a bit of a back injury and that kind of, that was a bit of a struggle for me. Massively into rugby, really love it. Played it for a little bit as well when I was younger and then, the back injury and all that kind of stuff. So I think just physicality in general is really fun to me, but I like bodybuilding because it's one of those things where I can take what I'm learning and what's coming out in the literature at the moment. It's a burgeoning field in the scientific literature, and you can literally take that and apply it in practice and see what comes of it. So that to me is very exciting.
Right. So that pure scientific sort of perspective you can take on it really engages you.
Yeah, I think so. But there's an art to it as well, because the science is never going to tell you what you should do as an individual. It gives us mechanisms, it gives us averages, it gives us a very constrained sort of set of parameters to learn about something. That's what science is. You've got to control variables so you can see what's causing what. But when you get into the real world, now you've got an individual who you don't know the unique combination of genetics and experiences and training age and all the other variables that go into it. So now you've got to somehow translate that and go, well, how is this applicable to the individual? And that's the cool thing about coaching. But to me, the people who go, oh, well, academics wouldn't know how to do stuff because it's just science and it's not in the trenches and all that. Well, you still need to know the stuff behind it. You still need to know the mechanisms and all of that. And that makes you a much better coach. It doesn't make you a good coach, but necessarily. You can be a good coach without knowing the science, but you kind of need both to be the best, I think.
Yeah, it gives you a greater potential.
Exactly, yeah.
I guess you could generalize and say that the fitness industry is full of people who are perhaps in the trenches, but who have missed out on the academic side.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
It is to get into fitness in Australia.
Exactly. And, that's same thing happened to me. Like, my story, I actually started doing a business degree when I left school. And I did a year of it, and I thought, I don't like this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I like training, and I like fitness, so I'm going to be a personal trainer until I figure out what the hell I'm going to do with my life. Mm-hmm. And so I became a trainer. And, I guess that's probably a really common story. The difference is that, a year or two into being a trainer, I went back to uni so that I could learn more about that and get a bit more of an academic background. So, yeah, I think you're probably right. There's a lot of people in the trenches, but not enough probably taking care of the theory side of things. Yeah.
Is it over checking out your Instagram, actually stalking you?
Yeah.
And
it's inspiring.
One thing I noticed is that you spend a lot of time focusing on the basics.
Yep.
And given the fact that you have this education base, a lot of trainers don't. That interested me, and it wasn't in. It was all very easy to understand. Is that because you're choosing your audience, you're talking in their language, or is it something that you truly believe that you should be focusing on these basics? And I would like to know what you would consider those fundamentals when we're talking about diet and building muscle.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's a bit of both. I started out talking about the more complicated stuff and being a bit sciencey, I suppose, and that stuff still excites me much more. But it's not really what's going to make or break anything. So I think originally I was really trying to speak to trainers, but I kind of slowly understood the more I presented that even if you feel like you've dumbed down something a lot, there's still people that you give this information to and they just sit there blankly and they have no idea what you're talking about. So I think it's a bit of perspective. There's something that I might have learned 10 years ago that to me is so basic and so everyday. It's like, as to a trainer, it's like doing a squat, But think about the person who's never seen or heard of a squat before and never done one before. That's kind of the equivalent of what I'm dealing with when trying to communicate science and nutrition and stuff to the average person. So it's easy to if you know what you're talking about, to get frustrated when people don't know what you're talking about. But I'd always think, if people are genuinely curious and they're genuinely asking a question and they genuinely don't understand, you have an obligation to tell them those basics. So for me, I think the basics and the fundamentals and the principles are 100% what's going to get you almost all of the way. And you'll see that with my own training and my own nutrition. I don't do a lot of complicated stuff. I do the really simple stuff very consistently, and I know what matters and what doesn't really matter that much. So I think it's probably a combination of both of those things you said, where firstly, I need to make sure that the people I'm talking to understand it. I sort of see myself as someone who's in between the scientific world and the average Joe and the average coach who maybe doesn't have a lot of scientific literacy. We need more of those people to bridge both worlds, to talk to the scientists and to talk to the general population and the average coach. But at the same time, those fundamentals definitely do get you most of the way. So for me, when people are starting to worry about things like supplements and meal timing, I want to tear my hair out, because I've gotten to where I am today, and not being funny here, but I'm got more muscle and I'm in better shape than 99% of people you'll ever see on the street, And I got that way by nailing basic shit. I don't do anything complicated. That's all it is, So yeah, I guess it's a bit of both.
It's a really cool point. I like on your Instagram too how you have the contrast between, you'll put you make like little graphics showing like a topic, and then the studies and what the studies found. And it's very scientific. And then the next post will be you taking a selfie in the mirror, hitting like a bodybuilding pose, and talking about your body composition and stuff. I think that contrast is super cool.
You know what? I think it is cool, but the funny thing is that I would put so much effort into these long posts that were fairly scientific that might have taken me a long time to research and takes a lot of knowledge into it. And as soon as you put up a selfie with no caption, man, you get double the likes, you get double the engagement. It's funny. You get so rewarded for it. Like all of a sudden I was like, I get why chicks just like sit in their bikinis and guys take photos of themselves when they're looking as lean as they possibly can. Like I get it now. But yeah, I think that combination probably helps, because, if you're someone who is scrolling through Instagram, which is a very visual medium, and you come across somebody's page that has a lot of writing and stuff on it, that's cool, but you're definitely going to pay a little bit more attention if you see like, oh, this is what this guy actually looks like. So he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but he also looks the part. I think that helps.
Break it up with a bit of eye candy.
You got to try. Yeah, you got to. Yeah.
And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes when your posts come up and I'm like, oh, this is sick, and I start reading it and I'm like, oh, I'm not ready to digest this amount of information right now. So I'll keep scrolling. But in the back of my head, it reinforces Luke's the guy that knows stuff. I'm like, he's a smart dude. You know what I mean?
Oh, dude. And I mean, I do that as well, So like, I'm not immune to that either. It's just like probably a natural urge or something. I don't know.
So you talk about basics and the basics that have gotten you to where you are now. Let's talk about the basics of just nutrition.
So I think of things in, like I said, principles or fundamentals, and I like to think of it as a hierarchy. So everything matters. Everything matters to some extent. If you take a supplement or if you time your meals a certain way, it's going to have an impact. It's just not going to have as big an impact as getting the right amount of food in, or getting the right ratio of macronutrients, for example. So to me, the number one thing that people need to be worrying about is something like energy balance. Now, how you achieve energy balance is sort of open. It's a bit of more of an open-ended question. You don't have to count calories, but by the same token, you don't have to be low carb. You don't have to go keto. You don't have to do intermittent fasting. You don't have to do paleo. You could do any one of those things and achieve appropriate energy balance. But if you're eating too much, you're just taking in too many calories, regardless of whether you're getting too many calories from carbs or from fat, you're going to experience problems, or you're going to expose yourself to having greater insulin resistance. You're going to expose yourself to having greater deposition of fat around your liver. All of those things, right? And that doesn't matter. The primary and most powerful thing you can do for your health is have appropriate energy balance, in my opinion.
What does that mean? Are you talking about the way you distribute the energy throughout the day, or
just the total amount?
Right.
And I think actually what was a massive shift for most people that I work with is thinking about their energy balance on a weekly basis.
Right.
So it's extending it over one meal and over one day, but out to a week, and thinking about it on that sort of level is just like a total paradigm shift for a lot of people. And the reason is because you can achieve similar rates of, for example, fat loss or maintaining your weight if your weekly energy balance adds up. So if your total energy expenditure per week is a certain amount, let's call it 20,000 calories for the sake of maths. That's a lot of calories, but we'll call it that. Then whether you achieve that by eating the exact same every single day, whether you eat a lot on 2 days and not so much on 5 days, or any combination of that, you will still maintain your weight. You will still lose fat. And that is really, really powerful, because underscoring all of these fundamentals is whether or not you actually stick to your diet. So adherence is really the number one thing, right? So we're talking about trying to achieve energy balance, but by the same token, if I tell some people that they've got to count calories, they're not going to do it. If I tell some people that they have to eat low carb, they might not be able to do it. Because we all have our own little preferences and lives going on, right? So for me, I might, with quite a lot of my clients, I will actually allocate an eating strategy where we're eating less food and less overall calories 5 days a week. And on the weekends, let's say Friday and Saturday, you can eat more. Now I can socialize, and now it's easier to stick to my diet long term. So energy balance is fundamental, but making it achievable for people is also a really important
Realistic.
part of that. Yeah, exactly.
And that's also why you were saying that something like paleo or intermittent fasting can work because of the fact you can span something like that over.
Exactly right. For some people and their personalities, being able to count everything and be a bit robotic about it matches them perfectly. They love doing that sort of shit. So I'm like that. I'm happy to do that, right? Like it's like the academic side of me. I like being able to measure stuff. But other people just need a simple rule that allows them to achieve energy balance. And if you have the paleo concept, to me that is quite ingenious because you simply go, could a caveman have eaten it? No. Okay, you're not allowed to eat it then. It's a simple line in the sand. You don't cross it. And that just manages energy balance really well. And, fasting can work like that as well. When I diet, I use a combination of counting calories and intermittent fasting because I just find it easier to manage my appetite that way. So some people freak out when you say like low carb or paleo or whatever is not the be all end all. It's not the magic bullet. And they go, well, shit, like that worked for me. Like what do I do now? But it's actually very freeing because it means anything can work for you, provided you know the underlying principle of energy balance and how it's working. So now, if you wanted to do keto for a month and paleo for a month and then high carb for a month and count your calories for a month, all of those will work equally well provided you stick to it. So to me, that opens up the options and it makes it very freeing and quite liberating.
I guess it'd be a good idea to give like a really basic understanding of, say, how paleo or how intermittent fasting or keto can affect somebody's energy consumption.
Yep.
It makes sense to us, but for the person listening, like, well, how does that change what's actually going in? Could you simplify that for us?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so basically this is it. We have a certain amount of energy that is required to run all of the processes that keep us alive. That's called our basal metabolic rate. That just keeps you going. Adding on to that is basically how much you move. We need to fund that. So if we add that on top and how much energy it costs to digest your food, we basically have your total daily energy expenditure. Okay, so that's going to stay, that's going to keep you weight stable if you eat that amount of calories. Now, what governs how much food we eat is essentially our appetite, how satisfied we are. And so certain styles of eating are going to make you more satisfied and certain styles of eating are possibly going to make you less satisfied and more likely to eat more calories. So if you ate 2,000 calories of ice cream or 2,000 calories of chicken breast, your weight will be the same. That's not going to change. So you could get shredded on KFC if you wanted to. The problem is you're going to be starving. You're not going to feel good, right? So our energy, our satiety mechanisms, our hunger mechanisms, our brain recognizes how much energy that is coming in, but it's not so good at handling certain food combinations in that sense. And there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. Whether something's super tasty, obviously you're going to eat more of it. Some things have a larger food volume that fill your belly up more and that makes you feel less hungry. So we can either take the approach of like, well, I'm just going to put into my body the exact amount of calories that I need, or I'm going to use a strategy that basically allows me to feel fuller or restricts how long I have to eat each day so that I can't eat as many calories. And that's the way I'm going to control my energy intake, right? So if we, for example...
That is just that last point is assuming that the tendency is to eat too much.
Yeah, totally.
Right, so the goal is to restrict calories.
Yeah, and I'll often talk in that context because 95% of people, that's what they're trying to do is like restrict calories to lose weight. Or control their weight, right? So, if I eat paleo, what are my options? It's high fiber, low calorie vegetables. It's protein. Things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that's really hyper palatable in there. There's nothing that combines super high fat with super high sugar. So ice cream is a great example of that.
Yeah.
The texture's great. It's high sugar. It's high fat.
Chocolate milk.
I mean, those things they're very easy to eat too much of, right? Whereas it's very hard to eat too much of like spinach, steak, that kind of stuff. Kale. It's very hard to eat any kale. Like, that sucks.
How dare you?
Kale sucks, man.
Ask my brother. He fucking hates kale.
I despise kale.
Yeah, he's like all this bullshit about kale being a superfood. He's like, spinach was a fucking superfood before kale was.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like kale's less tasty, so it must be better for you or something. I don't know what it is.
And it's more expensive as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, so there's ways we can manipulate that. To take the intermittent fasting thing, it's like, yeah, you can eat too many calories if you intermittent fast, totally. But it's much harder to eat too many calories when you're only allowed to eat for 6 hours a day versus 12 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
So we're just manipulating energy balance by changing these parameters of like, okay, what's the ratio of like high fiber satisfying foods we're eating? What's the ratio of how long we're allowed to eat? All of that sort of stuff. And that's how we're controlling hunger, and that's how we're controlling energy in versus just measuring it all. So that's why I like counting calories, because for me, I like eating ice cream. I like having chicken wings. I like drinking beer. I want to be able to fit that into my diet without, going over what my brain thinks is an appropriate amount of energy.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel super hungry if I drink 2 liters of beer. It doesn't satisfy my hunger if I drink 2 liters of beer, is what I mean.
Right.
Whereas if I ate the same amount of calories as brown rice, all of a sudden I'm not eating that much more.
Yeah.
So you can manipulate all of those things, and I think it really depends on personality and lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the context for that individual is really important.
It's super important, and and as a coach, that's where the coaching comes in,
Yep.
because all of those things work. So now the average person is going, well, what the fuck do I do?
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a coach or someone who knows a little bit more, they go, right, Susie, I've seen 1 million people like you before. This is what your lifestyle's like. You've told me what your work day is like, the type of things you like to do socially, all that sort of stuff. I think this approach is probably going to work quite well for you. Let's try it out. And that way you can get the best result for your client, whereas the same approach might not work for somebody else.
So these approaches, when you're talking general population, people that want to shift weight, but for the rest of us that want to build muscle,
Yeah.
what's the approach there?
So the brain also controls your...
Have parents from the Cook Islands or Fiji.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good approach.
Can we
I
go
like
back to the you can get shredded on KFC?
on KFC?
Because I kind of stopped listening after that.
Sky's the limit, son.
Yeah, that's it. But the other interesting thing is, like, once you spend enough time eating the right amount of food, your brain recognizes that as like your satiety mechanisms, your hunger mechanisms, and all that sort of stuff get more finely tuned. So for me, if I wanted to stay relatively lean and stay in shape, I actually don't need a track at all. Like, it's sweet. My appetite takes care of it. If I eat way too much on a Saturday night, I don't feel hungry on Sunday.
Yeah.
So I'm cool. I can remain weight stable, whereas other people might have more difficulty with that. So if you're someone who is overweight or obese, those mechanisms are not so finely tuned, and it has a lot to do with things like dopamine signaling and the level of receptors and all that kind of stuff. But to me, that's kind of a little bit meaningless because it reduces you to a chemical soup when you still need to be responsible for your behavior at the end of the day.
Yep.
But it can be much harder to feel satisfied by food. It's much harder for your brain to recognize how much energy is coming in if you are in that position. But if you spend long enough eating an appropriate amount of food, then that becomes your brain's new norm. The thermostat is reset, and then you maybe don't have to track your food anymore, or you don't have to worry about it too much. We just went away to the US. I didn't train for a month, and we ate like fried chicken every day. Speaking of KC.
Yes, sir.
And lots of Mexican food, and I came back 2 kilos lighter. You know what I mean? Like, so just because I'm able to manage my appetite a lot better. So
You didn't do any training for 4 weeks?
I trained twice, and the first time I did some split squats, and I felt so sick that I almost had to stop because I just went too hard. And the second time we were in a shitty hotel gym, and I pretty much, the dumbbells went up to like, I don't know, 20 kilos, so I couldn't really do that much. So those are 2 training sessions in a month.
Right on.
So something you can train then, I'm guessing, like, let's say you're dealing with someone who's wanting to shift that kind of weight, and I know that the body adapts.
Yep.
But are there things that you can implement while someone's eating, like teaching them how to be just awareness while they're eating, or being more intuitive about the way they feel after the food? Does that come as part of
Yeah.
it? Because it seems like a discipline in a way as well.
Oh, totally, man. But there's a lot that goes into that. So if we talk about there's something called the biopsychosocial model, and this has been applied a lot to pain, which is a separate conversation. But essentially, it means that there are biological factors involved. So there's brain chemistry stuff. There's gut hormones going on. There's all this sort of stuff. There's psychological factors involved. So emotional eating, for example, that kind of thing. And there's social factors involved. So you have to think about all of those factors, okay? Now, if, for example, there is a big block of chocolate in front of you and you're seeing it all the time, it's very difficult to not eat that chocolate. By simply putting it out of sight, it might be able to control some cravings, for example. Now, that's got nothing to do with, it could be anything. It could be chocolate or ice cream or chips or, even fruit. So that's a psychological aspect of it that you can, that's a little trick that you can use. Being mindful about when you're eating is another little trick. So to give you an example, there's been some research done where people using social media while they're eating, they eat more food. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's less mindful eating. So that's one trick you could use. You could say, okay, there's a rule. When I eat food, I'm going to sit down and I'm not allowed to look at my phone. And you might eat less as a result. There's things like emotional links to food. So to give you an example, let's say when you were a kid, and this was really common when we would play sport, my parents never did it, but a lot of kids, if they played well on the weekend, they would get to go to Macca's or something afterwards.
I got a Mars bar and or a Coke.
There you go.
Yep.
Super common.
Soccer.
How often did you get that?
When I scored a goal once a year.
Yeah, so you're probably right. But for a lot of people, they might have that association of having done well, of a reward by having those foods. And so you might have this unique sort of attachment emotionally to that food. A really good example that's often given is something like grandma's apple pie, right? So you might associate grandma's apple pie with being looked after, feeling loved, a nice summer's afternoon, back in your childhood kind of thing. Yeah. And it's just things like that might stick with you that make that food something that is
nostalgic.
Yeah, that is hard for you to not eat too much of. So there's a lot that goes into it. Aside from anything else, there's just a lot of sugar and fat in it, and that just sets your reward mechanisms firing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's all these things that actually combine together. There's no one thing. But to answer your question, yeah, there's lots of little things that go into it, and I think engineering your food environment and knowing what foods might be problem foods for you, things like that, can be really helpful in controlling and modifying your behavior.
What's your problem food? You mentioned
where do we start?
Chicken,
ice cream,
beer, ice cream.
100%.
I'm the same.
Yeah, ice cream. I eat a liter of Messina in one sitting.
Oh, you two have a lot in
every
common.
week.
I can do that. Yeah.
Easy. He thinks 1 litre for pussies. He could do it.
Yeah. Okay. So tonight.
He said every week though. I can't do it.
This is the problem, right? It's gotten even worse. So tonight, at the Newtown Hotel, which is around the corner from my house, they give you a kilo of chicken wings for $15, right? So I'm going to go there and I'm going to drink a pint of beer and I'm going to eat a kilo of chicken wings, and then it's only a 2 to 3 minute walk down the road to Messina, and I'm probably going to get a litre of Messina, and I'm probably going to eat the entire litre.
So how much of your weekly quota does that take up? Do you have to not eat for 2 more days? Or?
I'm pretty lucky in that my energy intake's very high, so I can kind of handle that. But last time I did it, man, I don't feel good. I feel terrible afterwards, but I still do it. You know what I mean? We're not immune to it. We're all just like monkeys with the same.
The mouth pleasure's worth it.
It's worth it, man. At the time, it's the best thing in the world.
Yeah,
I'd like to hang out with you.
That's an interesting.
I'm telling you, 5 p.m. It's $15 wings.
That's your hood, G.
No.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point though. So you're almost 100 kilos. What are you now?
Yeah. Well, coming back from the US, I'm about 94.
Okay.
So not quite there yet.
But so you're a heavy dude. You got low body fat, so that means you're carrying plenty of muscle.
Yep.
That then means that your total daily energy expenditure, your caloric requirement is quite high.
Yeah, it's high. And then,
so
I train reasonably hard and I walk a lot. I walk everywhere. By 10 a.m. I've done 10,000 steps, so that's not typical. So people today, I'm posting what I'm eating on Instagram today, and it's not a typical day because I just told you that it's wing day. So, but people really want to see it. And I'm like, I don't see how this is going to help you because I can eat twice as much as you. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's foods that you probably don't necessarily want. Yeah, I can understand why they want to see it, but I mean, it's like, listen, I really know what I'm doing here, and I've got a lot of, I got a client at the moment who has had to diet for a photo shoot on 1,200 calories. Now, for me, I eat 800 to 900 calorie meals. I mean, that's like not even on the same planet as her.
Yeah.
And she's got 1,900 calories, and she was literally tap dancing in the gym today. Like, I'm not joking. She was dancing in the gym. And to me, that is absolute poverty calories. That is me crawling everywhere. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah. So you got to all take that into account as well.
I got a question. I'm the newer PT who doesn't have that much connection with the scientific side. So say you work out the calories required to run your machine and maintain body weight, and you need a lot, and you can do all these things and eat. Going to the calorie output part, one, like, how do people scientifically calculate what a jog, how much output there's going to be for a jog as opposed to doing powerlifting one day?
Yep.
So how do we navigate that? And then, like, how does that happen scientifically? And then secondly, how does the average Joe, what's a good model that the average Joe can
why do you guys say average Joe? Why do you guys have to use that term? Average Joe.
Because you guys are all average.
We're going to stick with average Joe. But how's an easy way for someone like myself or everybody to think about, I went for a run, like, how can they calculate that to some bonus reward calories or not?
Cool. The answer is it's really hard. So scientifically, what you have to do, this will kind of answer the question a little bit, is you need to know how much oxygen has been taken in and how much carbon dioxide has been produced.
Ah, yes.
So we call that like respiratory exchange, and you quite literally have to have like the machine, the gas exchange stuff hooked up to you. That's how we know. So that makes it obviously completely impractical for the average person to know exactly how many calories they've burned. So do not trust what your heart rate monitor says. Do not trust what the machine at the gym says, the cardio machine or whatever. It's not accurate for you. The way they calculate a lot of that stuff is just by taking averages. But, obviously we're not average. We could be either side of average. We could be the outlier on either side. You just don't know. So, and also, just to add to that, during weight training, you burn way less calories than you think you do. I'm talking way, way less. Like, you probably burn more calories going and doing your grocery shopping than you do during a weight training session in most cases. So I don't like necessarily going on the output side of things to offset too much the input side of things, because it's so easy on an intake level to just out-eat whatever exercise you've done. Yeah. So for me, exercise is performance. Exercise is, let's get fitter, let's get stronger, let's get better at whatever we're doing. In my case, it's let's preserve and or grow muscle. And then, the general movement throughout the day, the 10,000, 15,000 steps or whatever that I do, that's also about health. That's about performance, because it's me getting outside, which is good for my mental health. It's general movement, which is a really powerful tool for your health in general, in terms of aiding blood pressure and blood glucose and all of those kind of things. So yes, it does contribute to energy expenditure. Yes, it does matter. But you're going to have a really hard time out exercising your food intake in most cases. And so I don't think you should necessarily be like, well, I walked for an extra half hour today so I can eat an extra 100 calories. I don't think that's the case. The way it's normally done in the science is that we use, like, if you were just physically calculating how many calories you could eat each day, there's an activity multiplier that you can use, and they're quite broad. It'll be like, well, you work out 3 times a week and you're moderately active or whatever. All those calculators do is they put you in a ballpark and they give you a figure. So your actual calorie needs might be something like 2,500 to 2,800 calories a day. The calculator might tell you 2,600. You don't know if that's actually accurate until you've spent a week or two consistently eating 2,600. If you're losing weight, it's too low. If you're gaining weight, it's too high. If your weight's stable, it's just right. And that's where you got to start. And that's as simple as that. But like I said, it all averages out. So this goes either way. If you have a day where you do tons of physical activity, I wouldn't necessarily recommend compensating for that by eating more. if you have a day where you blow your diet and you accidentally happen to eat a liter of Messina or have too many chicken wings, then I wouldn't necessarily try and compensate for that the next day. You could do that, but you end up always playing catch up then. What I would do is I would just get straight back on your diet and straight back on what you were doing before. Because over a month, all of a sudden that doesn't matter anymore. If we look at the trend line, if we look at the average, you won't even remember it. You won't see it at all, which is why I like this idea of like, let's take the daily intake concept, let's go to a weekly intake concept. And if you fuck up, dude, in 2 weeks, it's not going to matter. You're not going to see any difference on the scales because it's going to average out.
Yes.
It'll be fine. So we're always playing with averages.
That's a really cool point because we try to do the same thing with training, right? It's not about like what session did you do today?
Yeah.
It's like, did you train this week?
Yep.
And have you kept that up over the 6 or 12 month period? Then you're going to see a result.
And that's why I was saying before, I've gotten to where I've gotten because of consistency over time. That's all it is, right? So I don't sweat it if I can't train one day or if my session wasn't that great or whatever. I don't sweat it if I overeat accidentally sometimes. I just try and be as consistent as I can over time. And the averages take care of it, right?
That's very cool. I wanted just to add to Paul's query, I think I look a little bit into, like I've tracked my own calories for a while and I've helped a few people in the gym do it on a very general kind of sort of basis. And I find it quite an interesting process. I think something that strikes me as quite fascinating is that our BMR, like that basal metabolic rate, is pretty high. Like when you look at, say you don't do any training that day, or say you do an hour and a half of jiu-jitsu, or you do 60 minutes of jogging, compared to your BMR, the energy needs without the training, it's not a huge amount of difference, is there?
No, it's actually not that much.
Takes up the majority, doesn't it?
It's like our body uses a lot of energy just to exist.
Yeah, and definitely the most variable part is your physical activity. Because that's going to vary the most. The basal metabolic rate is going to be more or less steady most of the time. And it's very much tied to weight as well, because it's just like if you're bigger, there's more metabolism happening. And metabolism just means the chemical reactions that happen in your body.
Right.
So the bigger you are, there's more tissue, there's more chemical reactions happening. All of those got to be powered by something.
Yeah.
And so it's very much tied to size and weight and that sort of thing. And you're right. I mean, it's easily the biggest proportion, unless you're something like an endurance athlete who's training 3 to 5 hours a day or whatever it is,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think like like I mentioned, a lot of people will have a very difficult training session. Like certainly weight training hard for 45 minutes or an hour is very difficult, but the amount of calories you burn compared to how hard it is so disappointing.
Wow.
It's so disappointing.
Is that because there's rest periods and you're sitting around?
Exactly. So if you actually take the amount of time that you're active during a typical, say, bodybuilding session, we're looking at, for someone my size, maybe 150 calories for a session.
Oh.
If I went walking for the same amount of time, I'd burn more calories.
Like how many?
I don't know, 200?
Yeah, okay.
Something like that.
Extra, like
It'll be more.
30%.
Yeah, for sure. But the weight training session is way, way, way harder, and I'm obviously getting some unique benefits from that, and I'm growing muscle and all that sort of stuff, yes. But it's really disappointing when you've trained super hard and you haven't actually burned that many calories to show for it. It really disappoints a lot of people.
Well, it's disappointing when you know, but if you don't know,
if you don't know, it's great. Yeah.
Do you think is there a difference? Like, so say that the 24 to 48 hours following when there's recovery occurring.
Yep.
Is there more calories burned in that period after the weight training than there would be from, say, an aerobic effort?
There is, but during the aerobic effort, you burn so many more calories that it actually still exceeds that.
Wow.
Afterwards. So basically it costs oxygen to restore your body back to its normal level after you've finished weight training or doing something like a high intensity intervals or whatever. And we call that EPOC, excess post oxygen consumption. Basically it just means that you spend more oxygen and more energy just trying to get your pH levels back, just trying to get all of the metabolites cleared out and the muscle damage sorted out and all that stuff. But yes, it does induce a higher cost in the recovery period after training hard with intervals or weights, but it still doesn't outweigh the pure effectiveness of the amount of calories you burn during doing something like low intensity cardio, for example.
Wow.
I made an Instagram post about this, and I had some people furious.
I think I
I remember
remember
that one.
They were
Yeah.
angry.
Yeah,
Can't argue with the data, man. I mean, sorry.
Do you get haters? Do you get people trolling?
A
and
little
shit?
bit, not that much, because I tend to present stuff. I'm not like I said, I tend to present the data, and it's like, well, this is my take on it. This is the data. Take what you will, sort of thing. I'm pretty open-minded. Like, a lot of stuff works. You know, it just kind of depends whether it's appropriate for the context. I never say like this is the only way to do something, or this is how things are, or whatever it is. I use a lot of words like may and could and in the right situation and in this context and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I try to be pretty humble about it, and I try not to make people feel stupid, because there's so many people on social media that do that, and I just can't
Yeah,
stand
some
it.
pretty
Like,
strong opinions out there.
man, yeah, you know, even like I do Q&As, quite a lot of my stories that are very popular, and people often message me and say, hey, thanks for answering my question, not making me feel like an idiot about it. Because a lot of them, I'll be honest, I get questions that I think are really simple, and I'll roll my eyes at it, and I'll be like, for fuck's sake. And then I stop and I think, well, hang on, they don't know. Like, why do I have to be a dick if I know and they don't know?
Yeah.
I think about myself discovering something about whatever, carbs or energy balance 10 years ago. I mean, I would have felt terrible if someone that knew more than me went, oh man, that's stupid, or made me feel like an idiot for asking. So, yeah.
Your thing's bodybuilding. Do you coach bodybuilders as well?
Mostly physique stuff, yeah. Mostly
Right.
physique stuff. So
Physique is bodybuilding, but on a what's the difference?
well, when I say physique, it's probably like it's people who maybe aspire to look like a bodybuilder, but maybe don't want to compete. But I also do train like some competitors as well. But it's mostly just people who want to look good, and it's generally the person who is a little bit more serious about it. Yeah.
And you program for them as well.
Yeah.
What's the secret to building muscle on a programming level, like the stuff that you're doing in the gym? Are there, because I know, we've got the 5x5s and
Yep.
the hypertrophy phase and all this kind of stuff. Is there, and there's always this, like, and you see it floating around all the time, these holy grails, but is there a template that you tend to find yourself falling back onto because it's so damn good?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, so this is the same concept as with the nutrition, where a lot of things can work, and so we need to work out what's the common denominator between all of these programs that work to build muscle. And from what we understand, the principles of it are muscular tension. You've got to create tension on the muscle, and there's got to be enough volume, and there's got to be progression over time. So those are the three things, right? So let me this was also a paradigm shift that happened, I think it was around 2012 or something like that, maybe a bit later. A study came out where they compared using 30% of your 1 rep max to failure versus 70% of your 1 rep max to failure. They got the same muscle growth between both groups. So this was like, okay, we're working in the 40 to 50 rep range versus the 10 to 12 rep range. And there was no difference in muscle growth. And if we look at the molecular reasons why the muscle grows, the main signal is sent by tension across muscle fibers. Since then, they've done quite a lot of work looking at how many sets do you have to do, what's the most effective, and so we know that volume is a primary driver of growth. So once you've got that mechanical tension on the muscle, volume is then your primary driver of growth. If you can do more volume and recover from it, you'll grow faster, you'll get stronger faster. So you need to find for the individual, how much can they tolerate? How much can they do? And then obviously that just needs to get, more difficult over time. So it ends up being that a lot of different programs satisfy those conditions. And my own programming is unbelievably simple. Again, people look, like you said, they look for the holy grail. They're like, oh, he must be doing something special because he knows all this stuff and he's in decent shape or whatever. My program is the most boring thing you've ever seen in your life. It is so boring and straightforward.
Talk us through it.
But, okay, so today I needed to do about 8 sets of work on my pressing movements, like chest, and about 8 sets of work on my back, and that's what I needed to achieve today. So I did 4 sets of weighted push-ups, I did 4 sets of pull-downs, I did 4 sets of chest press with the dumbbells, and I did 4 sets of rows. That's it. There's nothing special. There's no special tempo. There's no special rest period. None of that shit. It was like 4x10-ish across all of those. And again, you do that consistently over time, and it gets harder over time by increasing the weight on the bar. You're going to get muscle growth. And that's as simple as it needs to be. Now,
I like how you said, I needed to do, as in you have, like, it's the minimum effective dose.
well, that's what I needed to satisfy, yeah. So I think about, okay, let me give you this. So on average, what we need to do is we need to get relatively close to muscle failure. And I'll explain why in a second, but let me just give you the overview to start with. So if you take a set within a couple of reps of failure, I call that a hard working set. We need to do on each body part between 10 and 20 hard working sets per week for optimal growth on average for the average person. So now your exercise selection, your tempos, your rep ranges, all of that shit, you can work out from there. But as long as you're satisfying that, you're going to grow. That's kind of what you're trying to satisfy. So that's what I was trying to do with my session. I was like, right, I do 2 of those sessions a week. So if I'm doing 8 sets today on chest, and I have another upper body session in this week that I already did where I did 8 sets on chest, I've now got 16 sets of chest for this week. And I've satisfied that condition. I'm right in the middle of 10 to 20 sets. Boom, that's it, done. Now, why do you need to go close to failure? This is because you need to put tension across as many fibers as possible. So what happens is your brain is super smart. It does not recruit all of your muscle fibers for every movement. If you picked up a pen right now and your brain recruited all of your muscle fibers, it wouldn't be a good thing. You'd throw it through the roof, right? So your brain knows if something's light, it doesn't need to recruit all of your muscle fibers. But if you're lifting a weight, and let's say we're doing a 50 rep set, and the first 20, your brain's going, yeah, it's light. I don't need to recruit all my muscle fibers. But those muscle fibers start getting tired and they can't keep contracting. They can't keep contracting forever. So they get tired, and your brain goes, okay, righto, those ones are tired, but we still need to keep lifting the weight, so let's recruit some other muscle fibers. Those ones get recruited and you keep lifting. Now, eventually, you'll get to a point where your brain's run out of muscle fibers to recruit, and that's when you hit failure. So, by that logic, if you have gotten to failure or very, very close, your brain has recruited and placed mechanical tension across every available muscle fiber in that muscle that you're using. That's why you need to get close to failure. That's why the rep range doesn't really matter that much. That's why if you do 30% 1RM to failure, you get the same muscle growth as if you do 70% 1RM to failure.
It's all about the failure
piece.
It's
all about the failure piece. Now, you don't need to go all the way to failure. You probably need to get within maybe 3 or 4 reps of failure. On average, I try to get within 2 reps of failure, just to make sure I've recruited everything. Now, some rep ranges are going to be, I think, still better to work in. Like I wouldn't do 40 or 50 reps, firstly because it feels horrible, and you kind of have to get through 35 reps before you get to the effective reps. And again, I wouldn't always do sets of 5 reps, because if you did like a heavy set of 5, you're recruiting everything from the start because it's a heavy weight, right?
Yeah.
But that opens you up to risk of injury. There's, if you misgroove a lift or something, you're more likely to fail. And that's kind of where we come back to that traditional bodybuilding range of like 8 to 12 reps. It still works really well because it's that happy medium where it's heavy enough that you can still keep progressing every week. But it's not so heavy that you're opening yourself up to risk of injury or technical failure too early in the set. So that tends to actually work quite well. But again, it doesn't really matter. What I actually do with my clients is if they pick a weight and I've given them a rep range, and they're like not close to failure when they hit my rep range, I make them keep going. Like if I tell you to do 10 reps, but you're not close to failure after 10 reps, like keep going, get 13, I don't care. 13 is going to be a better growth stimulus than 10.
Yeah.
If you get 8 and then you're close to failure, that's cool too. It doesn't matter. The 10's not a magic number. The magic thing is getting close to failure. So that's basically muscle growth for you.
So you keep...
Fuck, I love that.
You keep that rep reserve up your sleeve.
Just want to lift weights
Just
now.
because you can still get the same stimulus without risking getting yourself injured.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, if you're using very light weights, it's hard to progress the load on that, So I'm trying to find something that, firstly, I'm not going to expose myself to injury, and it's not going to be like, I have to psych up if I'm going to do a heavy set of 5 squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing. I don't really need to do that if I'm doing 10 reps. So it's that happy medium where it's heavy, but it's not super heavy. It's not too heavy. Now, there might be some independent mechanisms by which higher reps or lower reps can cause growth. We might get some preferential growth in different types of muscle fibers. So to give you an example, if you produce a lot of lactate, it can cause the muscle cell to swell up. So it changes basically how the body stores water, in which compartments it stores water. And so it can cause the muscle cell to swell up, and when the muscle cell swells, it can sort of signal, it's perceived as a threat to the integrity of the muscle cell, and the muscle cell produces more protein and grows. So that's, heavy metabolite lactate producing workouts that burn a lot and give you a big pump. That could be a particular mechanism by which that works a bit. And by the same token, if you're lifting very heavy, you might recruit more type 2 muscle fibers, the fast twitch fibers, right? So I still think over time, it's probably good to vary your rep ranges, also because it keeps you engaged and fun, and it's fun, right? So, given all of this, like, why would we ever do some of these fancy workouts that are like a post-exhaustion where you do like, all these fancy or giant sets or like whatever it is? Well, because it's engaging. You still got to enjoy your training. You still got to show up and do it hard.
Totally.
If someone told me that I had to do, 30 reps and do it a certain way every single time I came into the gym, I wouldn't be very engaged and I wouldn't be very fired up and I wouldn't put in a high amount of effort. So as a coach or as a trainee, you still got to work out, well, what type of training do I enjoy? What am I going to get in and do and be consistent with? What can I progress with? What's going to make me put in a high amount of effort with my training? And really, there's an endless amount of ways you can program, right? So,
yeah. So, scientist, chemicals,
yep,
muscle building.
Yep.
You must have done a bit of research on steroids.
Yeah, yep.
So, what's your thoughts on it? I'm asking you this because Joe's been trying to put on muscle for a long time now, and
I've left no stone unturned but one.
This is what it's come to.
But on a serious note, do you train people that are on the
Yep.
gear? And when you do you take the same approach, or do you have a different style of programming and nutrition for them?
It's mostly the same, but generally it means that the ceiling of how much volume they can use is a bit higher than the average person, and they recover a bit quicker. But the principle is still exactly the same.
What about side effects? Because there's a lot of debate about whether there is side effects, whether there isn't.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is that a lot of everyone's going to have their own reaction to using stuff, right? So some people won't really experience very many side effects, and other people will experience quite a lot. A lot of them, people try to mitigate side effects, like when you take exogenous from outside the body, testosterone, it can be converted into estrogen. That's how men mostly get their estrogen, is they convert testosterone via an enzyme called aromatase in their body. So a lot of people trying to limit estrogen because they think, female hormone, it's going to give me gynecomastia, all this stuff. And actually, estrogen is extremely, extremely important for mediating the muscle growth side of things, because it's very helpful to prevent muscle damage and help remodel muscle tissue. So actually, ironically, I think some of the side effects of having higher estrogen is probably what gives a lot of the anabolic properties to taking testosterone, is that you actually have higher estrogen as well.
Everything's just higher then.
Yeah, pretty much. And so as far as side effects go, you will experience some side effects potentially. There's things like, acne, gynecomastia, and potentially a faster rate of hair loss and things like that can happen.
What about the boobs?
So that's the gynecomastia. Yeah, so it's just a greater deposition of fatty tissue around.
Seen them before?
Yeah.
Around the nipples. Yeah.
Still remember Meatloaf from Fight Club, the character Bob with the dick stick?
Yeah.
Ex-bodybuilder?
Yeah, exactly. But, some guys will take a small amount of testosterone and they'll see that immediately. And other guys, it won't be an issue at all.
What about the testicles?
Yeah,
because I'm asking this because if I do choose to go on steroids one day,
they're gone.
Yeah,
they'll shrink.
I don't want mine to shrink any more than they already are.
Bro, it's a small price to pay for greatness.
Yeah, but
that's
you
true.
You can do with a little loss there.
Do you know what?
I want to hold on to all my gains, bro.
I participated in a study last year where they were comparing people who had never used steroids. So that was a group I was in. And then there was a group who had previously used steroids, and there was a group that had used steroids at least once in the last 6 months. So we're trying to compare like what were the changes in their cardiovascular health, in their body composition, in their testicle size, in their fertility, all that type of stuff. And so basically one of the things they did...
So who measured your testicles?
Yeah, that's what they did. That's what they did. It was one of the researchers, this Indian lady had to... Basically, they got a... It looks like a giant keyring. And they got a bunch of these like basically grapes on them. They look like grapes anyway. And they literally go, it's ordered in size, and they feel your balls, and then they compare it like which number.
Oh, they feel the grape relevant.
They feel the grape, and they're like, yep, yeah, that size. And that's what so I had to,
Wow.
Yeah.
When you looked at your grape size, were you impressed, or were you like, oh, it didn't feel like that?
I mean, they were average. So,
Yeah, okay.
Nothing to write home about, unfortunately. And then obviously had ultrasound and all of that stuff as well. But it was pretty cool because I got a DEXA scan out of it, and I got a calcium scan for my heart and all this stuff as well.
So I'm guessing your testicles stayed consistent throughout the test, and the guys that were on the gear, they were shrinking?
They would shrink, yeah.
Right.
So they shrink because there's a big hormonal feedback loop. And so when the body detects that it doesn't have to produce testosterone anymore, it reduces the amount of hormone that goes down to your balls to make sperm, basically.
And is it doing that to protect itself, or?
Yeah, it's just part of the way the hormonal feedback loops work in the body. So what happens is throughout your blood, you have little cells that are essentially sensors. They're monitors, and they'll monitor the amount of blood glucose you have. They'll monitor things like blood pressure, and they'll monitor hormonal levels. So if your brain detects that there is way too much testosterone in there, those sensors then send a message back to the brain and say, hey, we've got way too much testosterone, stop producing testosterone. And so your brain stops making its own natural testosterone, and it shuts down the whole thing. And of course, because you're injecting outside testosterone and your blood levels are always high, it doesn't get switched back on again until that leaves the blood. So
you can grow them back.
you can get it back. You can get it back. But the idea is like if you... So what the study was looking at as well is like if you stay shut down for a long time, I mean, does your fertility remain? So they're trying to compare the normal controls, the group I was in, who haven't used, to the people who had ceased using testosterone. Does it come back if you stay off it for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Man, I want to go back to just a couple of things on the nutrition front.
Yeah.
I got a couple of sort of rapid fire questions that I wanted to throw at you.
Cool.
And a lot of this is probably stuff that you were talking about. It was like shit that you learned 10 years ago. You're like, all right, you still want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
But I had a few people, I let some people know in my circle that we're going to have
Cool.
you on, and they threw some questions.
Awesome.
I guess a couple of very general questions. Given what you said about energy balance and this relative kind of simple concept
Yep.
that you follow that has produced good results for you and for your clients, what would you say is the number one misconception when it comes to losing body fat? Or the number one mistake people make?
I think the number one mistake is not paying attention to energy balance. And I think also believing that you have to do one thing forever. So some people freak out and they go, I don't want to count calories. And I'm like, listen, if you do it for 2 weeks, it could change the rest of your life. Because suddenly you will realize what is in your peanut butter. You'll suddenly realize, oh shit, there's actually not that much protein in eggs. It's like 50% fat and 50% protein, a whole egg.
Huh.
And that blows people's minds. They have no idea. It's like, dude, track for a week or two and you will learn so much about your current diet, and it will give you so much insight. And you never have to track again if you don't want to. But I'm telling you, it is such a handy skill to have, because then you suddenly understand, and it makes your life so much easier. So I think it is probably, not being aware that energy balance is the primary thing they should be worrying about, but then feeling like, shit, I have to count calories if I need to look after energy balance. And
This
you
is
don't.
me forever kind of idea.
Yeah, this is it, and you don't have to do that.
That's a great point.
Good point.
What would you say is the number one thing people don't do, or the number one mistake when people are trying to build muscle? So take let's say like the late 20s, early 30s guy,
Average Joe.
lean, average Joe, if you will. What's he doing wrong?
So this comes back to, your brain manages your food intake, both directions. I will put forward here, and you can fight me if you want, that eating to gain size and being full all the time is worse than being hungry all the time. If
Yes.
you have ever tried to put on weight and you have to eat in an energy surplus and you have to eat a meal when you are not hungry in the slightest, that is way worse
It's torturous.
than being in a deficit. It sucks no end. So I think being consistently in an energy surplus, consistently being the key operative word, is probably the biggest mistake that people make. It's very easy to overeat 1 or 2 days, but your brain will try and compensate for that. Remember the weekly thing. Like I said, if I eat a lot on a Saturday night, or if I eat a lot today, which I probably will, I'm not going to be very hungry tomorrow. And you'll subconsciously eat less. And on average, you'll end at the end of the week, you'll be eucaloric, or basically at energy balance. So I think consistently being in an energy surplus is probably the biggest mistake.
So you're saying that if you are trying to build muscle, you're trying to gain weight, you need to be eating generally to that uncomfortable amount every day.
Yeah, it will probably feel a bit uncomfortable for sure. And so I think people who are hard gainers basically just have highly tuned appetite control.
Yeah.
You know, like if you're 75 kilos and you just can't gain weight, it probably means your brain does a really, really good job of not letting you gain weight. You know,
It's regulating your
it's
appetite.
regulating your appetite really well. You know, just like there are people who really struggle to lose weight because their brain is not so great at regulating that. Same thing happens with people who are skinny trying to put on muscle.
Does the body get used to it? Does the brain get used to?
Yeah, you can recalibrate it, right? So
it gets easier to keep eating.
it does, yeah, but you've got to be consistent with it. So that's the
How long
problem.
you reckon?
I think it depends on the person. It really depends. So, you know, for me now, I could effortlessly maintain my weight around mid-90s, no problem. But when I first started lifting weights, I was 80 kilos, you know. So I went from 80 to like maintaining my weight 81, 82 no matter what I did, to building it up to 86 for a while. And after a while, I was 80, 88, 89. You know, I've gone all the way up to 105 kilos, and kind of that was my norm. You know? But you can reset that in either direction, provided you're consistent enough. Yeah.
Tell me this, because I, like everything you said, I agree with, and I've seen it work, and it's worked on myself. But then for, like, say, some of the people that I've consulted with on their nutrition, and we've looked at calorie targets and that kind of thing, and used, you know, a very simple online calculator and whatnot, I've found, and I guess this has been, my experience with this has been with females who are carrying excess body fat.
Yep.
So they're carrying excess weight, and they're grossly under eating. And then we get them, you know, adding, let's say, 30% extra food to what
Yep.
they're doing, and they feel like they're going to turn into a, you know, they're going to put on even more weight.
Yep.
And miraculously, they just start shedding weight.
Yeah, cool.
How does that happen?
Cool. I'm glad you asked that, because I think probably a lot of people are thinking that. The first thing is that you may get better adherence when you give people more food. So they might actually just genuinely stick to what they're doing better. We know that misreporting is a huge problem. It's often not a conscious thing. It's usually not a conscious thing, actually. But we know that everybody misreports. Doesn't matter. I misreport on I don't track everything perfectly, even though I'm probably one of the best people on the planet at doing it, right? So that's the first thing. I think maybe you get better adherence when you give people more food. The second part is a really big piece of the puzzle, and this is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So we call it NEAT. It's often abbreviated to NEAT, and it's basically the exercise or the movement that you do that's not planned. So people often refer to daily steps as part of it, which is like sort of part of it, but it's also things like your posture, how much you fidget, how much you move around, whether you lean on things or whether you stand up tall. It's things that you cannot subconsciously control, or you cannot consciously control, sorry. It's all subconscious. A huge part of NEAT you cannot control. Let me just reiterate that, because people think it's just how many daily steps you take, and it's not. Now, in some overfeeding studies, people respond differently to how much NEAT goes up or down. In one study, they had a bunch of people come in, they were overweight, and they put them in a metabolic ward so they could monitor everything that they were eating and all of the movement that they were doing. They overfed them by 1,000 calories a day, so a huge amount of food, right? Now, some people compensated to the tune of 700 calories increased activity, non-exercise activity, which reduced the surplus down to only 300 calories net after that. Some people didn't compensate nearly that much. So I would posit that it's probably a combination of people just staying on top of their food better and adhering much better on a consistent basis when you give them more food. And also they subconsciously move around much, much, much more.
Wow.
So this is a massive problem when we prepare people for bodybuilding shows or photo shoots or whatever. Sometimes you do give them more food and they actually lean out more.
Because they start doing more stuff.
Yeah, because if you're eating 1,200 or 1,000 calories a day, your brain's going, I'm starving. Fucking shut it down. We're not moving. And that goes for, like I said, postural things and things you can't control as well. So you can still give someone 20,000 steps a day. You're still going to get that adaptation where the brain just shuts it down a little bit. So that's probably a combination of those things.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that bro science piece of when you give your body a restricted amount of food, it goes into starvation mode and holds on to fat? Or is that just
not really,
that fits
no.
with the story?
But what does happen is you do get metabolic adaptation. So I said before that your metabolic rate is largely tied to your size. So if we got the average 80 kilo person in here, we would know roughly how many calories they're expending as a basal metabolic rate because it's been validated that many times. It's so closely tied to weight. You're hardly going to get any variation on that on an individual basis. However, if we got an 80 kilo person who had not been dieting whatsoever, we would work out their calories almost exactly. It'd be easy. If we had someone who used to weigh 85 kilos and had been dieting for the past couple of months and gotten down to 80 kilos, our predictions would not be accurate. Their metabolism would actually be lower than what we predicted. We call that metabolic adaptation. So basically, when you diet and you restrict calories, your brain recognizes that you're restricting calories and it reduces your metabolic output. That goes right back to normal when you start eating maintenance calories again. Maximum it'll take is 2 weeks to get back to normal, absolute maximum. But that happens for sure. So it's kind of, I guess you could call that starvation mode in a way, but it doesn't change the fact that if you're in a deficit, you're going to be losing body fat. Simple as that.
Yeah, right.
And it's reversible as well. It's a normal metabolic adaptation. But your brain can basically restrict energy. And it's how it triages it to tissues and stuff as well. So there's something called triage theory of micronutrition. And this was sort of popularized by a guy called Bruce Ames, who I think is now in his 90s. But he was a cancer researcher, and he worked out that if you restrict certain micronutrients, it increases the risk of cancer in some tissues. And so what he worked out was that you might be able to eat a certain amount of micronutrients, but the body decides where those micronutrients go once you've eaten them. And some tissues are more important, and some metabolic processes are more important than others. So if you only have a certain amount of zinc coming in, and there's something that desperately needs zinc to keep you alive, guess where the zinc's going? And all the other tissues then, sorry, you're last in line, you're not getting any. So your body triages that. And it turns out it probably happens with energy intake as well. So if you're eating a certain amount of energy, you have to fund physical activity. You have to fund the heartbeat, the lungs, the kidney, the liver. You have to fund all of that stuff first. There's no question about it. Brain gets first dibs on all glucose coming in.
Does 60% of calories go to the brain?
Yeah, it's quite a lot.
Roughly?
It's a huge amount of glucose, a huge amount. Yeah,
okay.
It's a huge amount. Things like immune system and reproductive system, not necessarily immediately required for survival. So especially reproductive system gets shut down straight away if you're severely restricted in calories. So it's partly related to that as well, where you can get some weirdness happening with your metabolism and your health and all that sort of stuff if you're constantly restricting calories too. So
yeah, okay.
that also happens.
Hi listeners, that actually concludes part 1 of this episode. We've cut this into 2 parts because Luke had so many awesome things to say, I think you might agree. You can catch the rest of our conversation with Luke in episode 2, which will be out in a week. Now, if you need help with your training or want to get in contact with us, please go to junglebrothers.com. And to find out more about Luke, his best point of contact is his Instagram. That's _Luke Tulloch. That's _LUKETULLOCH. Tune into the next episode. Thanks, guys.